Hi there, Roger Smith here. I wanted to talk about my experiments in writing with AI and competing against AI. You know, AI is coming for all of us writers, and we all need to ask ourselves the question at whether we're good enough to keep publishing books when AI can write as good as we can or maybe better. And so I had to experiment with it to find out how good it was compared to my own writing. And so I did that with a story called The Surgeon's Genie. Now, I write a series about robotic surgery, and the first novel in that series was The Surgeon in the Mirror, which I wrote before ChatGPT came out. And since then, I've written three more books in that series, three more full-length novels in that series, and I didn't want to corrupt or change those by letting AI write them too much. So I embarked on a short story project and asked the AI to help me or to contribute to the short stories that I wanted to write. And so the first of those was an origin story that happens before the surgeon in the mirror. I called it the surgeon's genie because of the magical properties of the robot and the AI that emerged for the first time during that story. And I thought it was safe to experiment with a short story and compare what AI, specifically ChatGPT, could do with that story at that time. Now, it's fair to say that if you're talking about writing with an AI, your experience every month will be different because these AI get better every single month. So what you hear in this video will age out because the AI is just going to get better and better. But here is one point in time. So what I decided to do for Surgeon in the Mirror was to ask GPT to please rewrite a segment of the text and make it more compelling for the reader. That was the prompt. And then I would give it a chunk of text from the story that was less than 1,000 words long. And it had to be less than 1,000 words long because that's the biggest chunk of continuous text that GPT or Claude or any of the others could handle at a single time. And that's still close to right. They're getting better, but that's still pretty accurate. So what that meant was I had to break my story into chunks and feed it to the AI one chunk at a time. So here's the process that I used for the story, The Surgeon's Genie, which is published and available for free on my website, or you can purchase it on Amazon, whichever you like. So the first thing I did as the author was I sat down and wrote the story in the same way that I would always write the story. And I went through multiple drafts. For me, getting to a good draft usually requires about 5 or 6 drafts. And once I was finished with my writing job, I sent it off to my story editor and my grammar editor. And they worked on it in the typical way and gave me all the corrections that I should be aware of, things that I had done wrong or things that I could improve on. And then I fixed all the things that they asked me to fix. And in the typical publishing process, I said, okay, that's the story. It's done. It's ready to go to the book designer. But I didn't send it to the book designer yet. Put it aside. Then I fired up GPT-4 and I segmented the novel into approximately 1,000 word chunks. Sometimes 800, sometimes 1,000. If you go over 1,000, the AI tends to ignore those last 100, 200, 300 words and act as if they weren't even there. And so I have experience with that, giving it chunks that were too big and finding out that pieces of the story just disappeared. And with each of the chunks, I said, please rewrite this to make it more compelling for the reader. And then it would spit out a corresponding chunk. Let's consider it approximately one chapter. And I would collect each chapter as it came out and stitch it back together into a single manuscript. So this book is 20-ish chapters. So that was 25-ish to 30 of these chunks going through GPT. And once I had it all stitched back together, I, as the author, had to sit down and read what the AI had created and fix mistakes that it makes with the story. So over all of these chunks, it will make some mistakes that are really easy to fix. Like it'll change the name of the character from chapter 2 to in chapter 12, and it will be calling it Jeannie in one and Jeanette in another chapter. And sometimes it mixes up roles. So Martha becomes Mike and things like that. It also can change some of the facts that happened earlier in the book. They'll disappear later in the book or get misconstrued later in the book. So I had to fix all of those so that the story was still accurate. And then I sent it to the editor, and I gave her the instructions that I gave to myself, which was let the AI tell the story it's trying to tell. Don't try to force it back to the story that I told, where it went off on tangents or changed the mood or changed the location or changed what happened in a chapter. Let it tell that story. We're just here to fix the spelling, the grammar, punctuation, fix anything in the plot that got broken and fix dialogue where it doesn't write good dialogue sometimes. Sometimes beautiful dialogue, sometimes really stilted and awful dialogue. So she fixed it for me, or for the AI, for both of us. And that last version came out. Now I have two versions of the story. The version that I wrote in the traditional way, and the version that the AI didn't write from scratch, rewrote from my work. And I bound both of them together, gave them both to the book designer, and she put them both into one book, which you can get as an ebook on Amazon or from my website. And they're both there for you to examine and decide which one you like better. So, what did I learn in this process? Well, I learned what GPT-4 does well, what it does poorly, and a little bit about how it's evolving from month to month. So first, on the good side, it can be very creative at imagining plot ideas. It came up with some ideas that occur in India, which I hadn't done so well, and that it did a really great job of. And I saw that how it had improved the story. It's also very good at describing places and mood. So I would, if I anthropomorphize it, I would say that it slows down and puts more effort into writing about the place and the mood of what's going on. Whereas I tend to hurry to get to both dialogue and action. And so I spend less time describing place and mood, and it does that better. It's excellent at accessing cultural facts that enrich the story. Part of this story happens in India, and it has access to an encyclopedic amount of information about India, and it incorporates that into its version of the story. Whereas I have to look up every fact that I'm going to put in. So that's really a nice positive, a way that it enriches the place and the mood. And then lastly, as far as consistency about facts, names, things like that, it's 80 to 90% accurate across the story. So that's 80 to 90% good, and 10 to 20% needs to be fixed. So what does it do not so well? Well, at the time that I did this experiment, it very much did not like to write dialogue. So when it was rewriting one of my chapters that had a lot of dialogue between characters in it, it would wantonly cut out an entire page or 2 pages of dialogue and just do the actions that happened, the description of the place and the mood, and the dialogue just wouldn't exist at all. So the characters didn't talk to each other very much. And when it did that, if it did it for a paragraph, I let it stand. But if it did it for 2 pages, I would go back and tell it, you need to rewrite that chapter and include or keep the dialogue between the characters. So if I forced it, it would write dialogue, but left to its own devices without explicit instructions, it doesn't like to do dialogue or didn't like to do dialogue. It's also very repetitive. Sometimes it can get stuck on a concept or a scene and just write about that concept or scene over and over again. And the reader is feeling like, I got the big idea. I understand what you're trying to tell me. Let's move on. But it keeps hammering at those ideas over and over again. And if you read your manuscript carefully, you'll find that it has some favorite phrases, like most human authors do. And it will repeat those phrases multiple times through the story. And they'll jump out and you're going, we used exactly this same phrase like 8 times through this story. It the repetitiveness also contributes to the fact that it doesn't bring a story to a close. It knew it was rewriting an existing story, but it didn't want the story to end. So as my chapters were we'd been through the climax and they were starting to come to the conclusion and wrapping everything up, it just kept going on and adding more repetitive events and trying to keep the story going and adding events that I didn't have. It just doesn't want to stop the story. And I finally had to tell it, this is the last chapter, just stop. You can't write anymore because it didn't seem like it was ever going to end. And then it can't plant clues early in the story and then leverage them later in the story. So in several places, I put clues or information in early chapters because I wanted it to be a revelation or a zinger or something later on in the story. And it saw no need for those clues early in the story, and so it would take them out. And I would have to edit them back in so that you could get the aha 10 chapters later. So those were the things that were not so great. 2025 update, since we've crossed into 2025, now it's more willing to write dialogue. So when I work with it now on other short story projects, it's willing to keep the dialogue I've written, and it's willing to write its own dialogue, which isn't too bad of dialogue. And then I now have lots of practice of writing and reading my own work, and then reading AI's work and comparing my ideas as expressed by the AI. And I have to admit that I'm learning to write better by seeing my own words recast by this AI. So essentially, what you get from a really good editor who points out something you should have done in a story and makes you do it rather than letting you off the hook and letting you stay shallow. So I think I'm getting better as a result of using this AI. Now, before we get to the big question, I also want to talk about the cover, a different AI, not GPT. I was experimenting with Dolly and with Midjourney on some kind of cover image for the story. And at the time, I was not able to generate a cover image that I was happy with, that conveyed the story or that had the punch or that fit into the series like I wanted it to be. And the two things that I wanted to point out with these images, the one on the left is from Dali, and that's the style that it insisted on drawing at the time. And I found you could not say anything about robotic surgery to Dali because it doesn't know what the current level of technology and devices are in surgery. So when you say robot and surgery together, this is what it thinks of every time: humanoid robot wearing scrubs. Now, why is it juggling? I have no idea. I didn't tell it to juggle balls, but I got 4 or 5 images where the robot is juggling. That just seemed to be the mood of the month when I was doing the project. And then the one in Midjourney, it was able to generate some great looking characters. In fact, I could accept this character as the main character in The Surgeon's Genie. I would say that's a really good rendition of that character. But the background, I couldn't get that character doing anything in a realistic surgical environment. So I didn't use AI to generate the covers for this short story. So I've continued to write short stories, sometimes because I want to enhance or take a tangent off of the longer novels, and sometimes because I want to experiment with new ideas in using AI. The story I just told is just how I did it for The Surgeon's Genie. I used AI and did different tricks with the Freya AI and Jack Hunter and Lauren Bannister. All of them, I used AI in some way to help me write, but all of them, I did something different because I'm trying to learn. Now, do I think that AI in the form of these generative AI models, large language models, Will they be able to write better than human authors? I think absolutely yes. In the near future, they will be better than 80% of human writers. I think they can definitely be better than I will be unless I learn from them to become a better writer, and I learned to use them in my writing so that me and the AI are both contributing to the story. And I really believe that if an author doesn't do something like that, that 80% of us will probably be out of a job. There are the 10 or 20% that are just outstanding at what they're doing or have such a fanatical following that they'll always be in demand. And probably it would be dangerous for them to use AI because it would corrupt or compromise their reputation. But for the other 80% of the authors trying to get published out there, I think we're all going to need to use AI in the future. So all four of these short stories are available for free if you want to go to my website and download one of them. For direct download, you'll find your way to the Surgeon's Genie first, and then later, as you things trickle out to you, you'll find the others. Or if you're really generous, you can go on to Amazon and you can purchase all of them because they're all up there for 99 cents. All right, thank you very much. That's how I used AI to help me write in one instance.